start with a pup date this time. So, oh, the good thing is I'm unmuted without me even touching the button. Good job, everybody. Okay, so we only have one for both. Charlotte, can you go to your hobby hole? Can you go to your hobby hole? Thank you. Good girl. Here you go, buddy. Good boy. I like your cross paws. You look very gentlemanly. Let's see if we can show the cross paws real quick. There you go. Cross paws. Looking like a super gentleman. Charlotte, you look like a troll and like we should pay you a bridge toll. Good job. You're the cutest. Good boy, Bear. All right. So today we are talking about pitching magazines. So now I'm unmuted. I was muted on one screen and not the other. Okay. So we did our pup date, and we're talking about pitching magazine articles. This is one of my favorite things to do. I pitched a lot in the beginning of my career, and now I don't pitch as much because it just depends on what I'm doing. Like it's kind of like you get more inbound, you develop relationships with editors, and then you're kind of like not having to do full-on pitches in the cold, basically, to editors you don't know. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about steps. First, we're going to talk about the steps in your pitch. I've always had this kind of format that I kind of go with. I have to cough. Hold on. Cough. I've always had this format that I go with for my pitches. So basically, it's, hey, hi, editor. I think I have a pitch for this magazine, name of the magazine, and then put in the section that you think it goes in for, the health section or the food section, whatever. Then you just drop down a line and write the headline. Like put the headline in bold, have a super, super snappy headline. And if you want to go and do like get more attention in your subject line of your pitch, write pitch in all caps, PITCH : and then put your headline there. Or you can say pitch, and then a short version of your headline. But you want something spicy, something exciting that helps editors open up that email. So then we're back in our email, we have our headline in bold, and then you start out with basically the way that you would have it printed in the magazine. So if you go through the magazine and you look at their first few sentences, that's what your pitch should look like. It should mirror that, because your pitch shouldn't just be this general amalgamation of information. It should look like what's going to be printed in their magazine. It shows that you understand their audience, their tone, style, format, how it should be read, how it should deliver information. That's really important. So your first couple of sentences need to read like other magazine articles. They need to read with the ability to pull someone in immediately, not like something like, according to this study, you need something that says, hey, this is like an interesting thing, or ask a question. I am like famous for sending pitches where my first sentence is a question. Well, have you ever thought about blah, 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 blah? Or what would happen if da, 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 da? Or how do we actually go about blah, blah, blah? I always kind of start my pitches that way because it gets someone thinking, and then you deliver the answer. So your first paragraph is basically like, hey, spicy few sentences to draw you in, and then a couple sentences of like, don't worry, I have data to back that up. This is a recent study that backs it up. This is a recent trend that backs it up. This is a recent other thing that there's some sort of timely information there that backs it up, that gives them something where it's like, don't worry, this isn't just a series of questions or like, me just drawing you in. It's actually backed up by really important information. Or sometimes that's a recently published book. Sometimes recently published books. Sometimes it's magazine, it's articles in medical magazines. There's all these things that we can do to basically back up our idea for this article. So first paragraph should be your 2 sentences of like spicy, draw them in, intrigue and mystery. And then your next 2 should be like, let's go into the data in a fun way, not just like, just like barfing a bunch of stuff. It needs to be readable, understandable, quick to the point, and really fit your topic. So then we go into our data. Our second paragraph can be a couple different things. So our second paragraph can be adding to the data. It can be adding information. So it can be stuff where, depending on the pitch, you're like, yeah, I need more information. I need to beef this up a little bit because this one piece of data or these few sentences doesn't really capture the whole meat of it yet. So your second paragraph can be that. Or more often, my second paragraph is I say, like, in headline, right? And I say the headline. In headline, I'll explain, how this, why this, what that, steps to take to do this. I use different phrases here to show the editor, like, hey, the piece is going to be about this. I'm going to answer these questions in the piece. I'll also add in that second paragraph of, hey, these are the experts I'm thinking about talking to. And you name specific people like Dr. So-and-so or, registered dietitians, this person. You want to give them the type of sources that you're going to be speaking to because you want them to be able to see as much as possible. They can envision the piece. And you're like, let's say you wanted to do a registered dietitian, and they're like, you know what? I think you should talk to a holistic, nutritionist or some other type of thing. They can see that, and editors can give you feedback. It gives them a lot bigger of a picture of the detail that you're putting into your pitch. So that second paragraph could either be added information that you need to beef up before you get to the part where you talk about what it's about. But more often than not, mine is like my second paragraph of my pitch is like in headline, I'll talk about why this is happening, steps to do this, how to do that, what to recognize for this. I walk them through the questions, that editor I'm pitching, of what the article will really answer and talk about any experts. Then my third paragraph is, again, could be a couple different things. My third paragraph, if I just want to be short and sweet with my pitch and make my pitch 3 paragraphs total, I'll just make that last paragraph like, hi, I'm Mandy Ellis. I'm an Austin-based freelance writer. I write about whatever I'm pitching, right? I say, like, I write about food and travel, and I've written for these publications. Here's a link to my portfolio. Thank you so much for considering, or looking forward to your thoughts, and ending it there. The other option is that sometimes you have to send pitches that are like really outlining the article. So for example, sometimes when I send a beefy listicle, I say like number one, after I say my paragraph of like, what am I going to answer in the piece? I'll send like number 1 would be this hotel. Number 2 would be this hotel or this property or this restaurant. Sometimes you have to outline them enough so that they can see what you're actually including, so they can see if it fits or not. Sometimes what you need to do with your pitches, especially in things like food and travel, or places where you're really highlighting like specific places that you're really going to have to drill down. So let's say a specific place, like you're going to drill down a property to like 100 words per property. You need to give the editor some bits of information there. Sometimes what you need to do here is that you need to give them a little feel for like, what is it actually going to be? Here's what I'm thinking to include on this list. Here are the tips that I've been researching I think that are useful. Give them 2 or 3. Here are steps, a few steps I've been thinking of. Here are a few strategies I've been thinking of, and put those in there because you need to give the editor enough information to say yes and to see the bones of the article. The pitch isn't just to be mysterious enough that they're just like, yeah, tell me more. We want to give them enough information in that pitch that they say, yes, like this bones of this article makes sense. Fix these few things, add this property, talk to this expert. There's enough in there that they can see the shape of the article and how it would basically relay to the magazine. After you add that extra beefy part, if it needs it, you go into your last paragraph, that 4th paragraph, after your beefy extra stuff, your steps or a few different things in terms of properties or restaurants or, people to feature. Then you go into the credibility, right, that I talked about, which is like, hi, I'm a freelance writer. I write in these niches. Here's past clients. Here's my portfolio, and end it there. So when we're creating our pitch, basically the way that I used to do it was like really long pitches. I would write these like 2-page pitches. I'd go into my Word doc and I'd write my 2-page pitch. And I realized over time that my shorter pitches that were like, hi, spicy sentence, data. In this article, I'm going to answer these questions. Experts, hi, I'm Mandy Ellis. I'm a freelance writer. Here's some credibility. Those were way quicker responses than my long ones. My long ones were just like way too much time and effort. It was hard to pitch them to different magazines because they ended up being so specific to that magazine. I ended up just kind of creating that formula of like a few short paragraphs and calling it a day. It was a lot easier, a lot less like in depth um, research. It was a lot more, it was more of a chameleon. I could pitch it to different publications without having to change a ton of it or make a lot of mistakes or, all that stuff. Hey, Getty, welcome in. Um, we started late, Getty, so don't worry. We actually started late today, so you're basically right on time. We've only been going for about 10 minutes, so we started a little late. So welcome in, Getty. So when we're writing these pitches, oh, hello. Let's do a quick pup date. So when we're doing these pitches, can you go to your hobbit hole? Good job. Good job. There you go, buddy. So when we're writing these pitches, oh, don't choke, okay? When we're writing these pitches, we want to make sure that we are, I have to get more Tritos out of the bag, that we're being clear and concise. So I found that sometimes it's really good to write a longer pitch. Sometimes that's a really important thing for a bigger magazine. So maybe you're submitting a piece to Smithsonian, or maybe you're submitting a piece to the New York Times, or maybe you're submitting a big giant feature piece. And for those, maybe you want to have a little bit of a longer pitch. But for most stuff, we want to make sure that our pitches are not hogging all of the editor's time. So something important to remember is that your editor's inboxes, they get hundreds of pitches a day. Most of the time, trade magazines don't get as many pitches per day, but lots of those bigger magazines, online publications, end up getting hundreds of pitches per day. That means they're going through all these pitches all the time. We have to be short, snappy, to the point, stand out amongst hundreds of emails, and that can be really difficult. And the point of our pitches should be that we actually get to the point of the article. We get to all of the pieces that put it together, all of the things that make sense in a short, snappy, concise way, hit all the things that are going to be answered in the article, give them a tone and style feel for our writing, and make it very apparent that that piece belongs in the magazine. So those are kind of our steps we need to do for our pitch. You can experiment with different subject lines too. This is something I get asked about, is what kind of subject lines capture their attention. Honestly, if you just write pitch in all caps and then write something snappy there, that helps a lot. But just to identify that it's a pitch, that really helps it stand out. But also that you have something that's, sometimes what works is you could just say like, hey, freelance food writer with an idea. Sometimes what works is you can say part of your headline or your whole headline. Sometimes what works is if you ask a question. But the subject line isn't always the thing that makes it get clicked on. It's more the meat of the inside, because they just get so many pitches. They're, clicking through and reading and scanning. We want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes. So when we're going through our magazines and making sure that we are pitching properly, you have to read the magazine. It is always very obvious when a writer does not read the magazine. And I'm not saying read one issue. You need to read 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 issues to understand tone and style, to understand what kinds of sections come up every year. Maybe they do. Hey, Lori, welcome in. Yeah, so Lori, I'm going to answer your question in just a second. So when we're looking through the magazine, there are special sections. Sometimes every fall they do like a holiday section, or every September they do back to school, or they do Valentine's Day, or they always have a new restaurant section. Hello, I see you're traveling. They always have these things that pop up, and it's really important to make sure that you have an idea of what that structure of the magazine is, the print version or the online version. Like, how does that actually work? And then we need to know tone and style. And I find that for me, it takes 2 or 3 reads of the magazine, or reads like, it takes me 10 articles online to like really get a feel for tone and style. Not just a general idea, but like I've read enough that I'm like, I know how to now write like this. That's the big difference, is not just that we have the idea of what it is. Okay, they're like kind of edgy, or they're very formal, or they're talking to single moms, or they're talking to super corporate like millionaires who run giant companies. Like you have to read enough of their material to really be able to not just know what they're talking about, who they're talking to, how they're talking to them, but write like that. So I find that that's really important. I'm going to answer Lori's question. This is a great question. So Lori says, that's a great format for a pitch. So hopefully that helps. Do some magazines have their own pitching format they prefer? Is this available online? Sometimes, but very rarely. This is the kind of thing that's funny about. What are you doing? You're just being a travel bean. Um, is she attached to something right now? Okay. Sometimes she gets attached to cables. So when we're thinking about magazines, they have very outdated pitching guidelines. So most of the time, like 9 times out of 10, the pitching guidelines that you find online, the pitching PDF that you download, or the type of information they give you is like super outdated. If you check the date on it, it says like 2015, or like I think one that I found was like 1997, or like they never update those things because they're accepting pitches. They're in their inbox. They're not over there saying like, I hope they pitch us better. Your job as a writer is to understand the magazine. So they don't have their own pitching format, but they definitely have their own tone, style, way the information is presented. If you go into a magazine and you start reading it and it's different than how you normally pitch, go with that magazine's tone style. So, like, if you go in there and you're reading a magazine and you just feel like, okay, I need to switch up my initial paragraph because all of these intro paragraphs in this magazine are way different than what I normally do, then do that. But what you want to do in your pitch is you want to give them structure. What they care about is, what are you answering? Why do I need to publish this right now? Why is this relevant to my readers? How is this unique? And are you kind of the person to do it? Do you have, can you show me within this pitch that you're the person to write this? You understand our magazine. You understand the bones of the article, what it should answer based on previous issues that we've published. So it is available online. There are pitching guidelines online, but most of the time they're very outdated. And what you want to do is basically like put your pitch in the mindset of that magazine. And oftentimes, when you're pitching to multiple different magazines, your pitch only needs to be kind of slightly changed to pitch to multiple magazines, because when you have a story, you're not really always like pitching it to like very different types of magazines. I know people who just don't change their pitch at all. They just write a pitch and they just send it to as many people as they want and they go about their business. Um, so I think when it comes to that, I think for me, what's been most effective is just meeting the tone and style of the magazine and getting familiar with certain categories. So, for example, if I was going to pitch an idea to Condé Nast Traveler, I wouldn't pitch it to Travel and Leisure because they're direct competitors. So that's usually like a no-no. If I pitch it to Condé Nast and they're like, no, then I'll pitch it to Travel and Leisure. I always give preference to editors I've worked with in the past. I always give them longer lead times, like, hey, let me know in the next couple weeks what you think. I don't just say like, I don't send the pitch and then move on with my life. But I think when it comes to pitching format, I think you have to pick the format that makes the most sense for, I think it makes the most sense for like how you can structure the piece in a way that like clearly and succinctly explains the idea and why it's valuable to the magazine and it fits the magazine's tone and style. I think that's the most important. So let's see our notes here. Let's make sure we have all these things. So when we're looking at tone and style of the magazine, like I said, there are a lot of things that really help with figuring that out. Not just looking at the structure in the sections, not just reading multiple issues or multiple articles. I have also found what's really helpful is to find like one writer who consistently writes for that magazine and read their articles over and over again. Not a writer who writes like op-ed and they can just write however they want. Not that. You need to pick someone who obviously has a relationship. Like you've seen their name in like 3 or 4 issues, or you've seen their name all over the website, and they're writing pieces where it's like byline stuff, but it's not personal opinion. It's not, just like them writing however they want. So read their stuff. I've done this with a ton of different magazines. I just read like 10 of their articles and it's like, oh, I get it now. Because it's the same writer writing in the tone and style of the magazine, getting a feel for like them writing for different sections. And I think that kind of shows you how to write your pitch. It gives you like not just the idea, but like how to change your writing or how to morph your writing to like fit that publication. Because the whole point is that we're submitting this idea to get it published, right? So we already need to be a step ahead. We need to be a step ahead in being able to write like that, because if we get it, if the pitch gets accepted, we have to write like that. We have to write like the magazine to get our article published. So I think that kind of, what is it? Not supersede, but like front loading. It's front loading actually writing the article for the magazine, because if you're practicing that in your pitch, which your pitch is a writing audition, that's the thing you need to do to prove you can write for that magazine. Practice that in your pitch. Write it up. Understand how to write like that magazine, send the pitch, and then you're already kind of front loaded for writing that piece. All right, the next thing we want to talk about is standing out in their inbox. So this is something that I always thought that there was like little rules we had to follow. I always thought that there was stuff where if we didn't do X, then the magazine editor wouldn't open our thing. If we didn't do Y, then they would just delete it. And it's true, they delete stuff all the time, but most of the time they're deleting things that aren't a fit for their magazine. So in order to stand out in an editor's inbox, it's not really always about subject line, which that does help. If you have a creative subject line, that does help. But most of the time, standing out is showing that you have a unique take on an idea. It is an idea that really isn't just like every other thing they've seen. It's not like 5 must-have back-to-school supplies or like 5 ways to like cook your Thanksgiving turkey. It's like truly unique stuff that they couldn't have gotten otherwise if you didn't pitch it. Like that kind of stuff really stands out. They get a lot of pitches that are similar. Like imagine getting all of these back to school pitches, and they're not just getting pitches from writers, they're getting pitches from PR companies, they're getting pitches from experts, they're getting pitches about all these different products that they should include, or services, or companies, or destinations, or restaurants, all the time. And you have to stand out with like your pitch that truly has a unique spin on something. It's not just everybody can write it, right? Like it's not just something that is a generic listicle. It's not just something that it's something that you really understand well, or that you've collected a lot of data. So for me, I end up collecting hotels over like a long period of time and then pitching a list of really unique hotels. And I do the same thing with restaurants or properties. Like I collect stuff and then I pitch that. And it's really unique because no one else is like collecting this specific list. Sometimes there's a little overlap. But oftentimes when you're kind of collecting these things or curating a list or understanding what the magazine does and then putting your unique spin on it, that's what makes it stand out. When we end up kind of making, like if you think of your article that could basically be for anything, then you have the wrong idea. What makes it stand out is you're like, here's this random study, or here's this book, or here's this unique, like, I went on a, like, you don't just pitch them a travel story that's like, I went to this island. Are you interested in a story? You pitch them something like, I went to, the last 2 rare species of tortoises were born on Richard Branson's island. I saw them in person, and like you talk about how they've avoided extinction, or something rare about them, that like they're the only source of this in the world, or whatever. And that's true. I read that the other day. That's why I'm using it. Is Richard Branson's Necker Island. They had 2 tortoises born that are like those super rare tortoises. And that's what I read, right? And this was an article that not everybody could write, because that person was there, that person saw it. Or they knew, they had like insider information. But you need to put your unique spin on it, and it needs to fit the magazine. There's a lot of times when people pitch magazines where it's obvious they never read the magazine. It's obvious that the idea isn't a fit. Are you being grumpy over there? Are you being grumpy? What's wrong? Oh, gosh. All right, let's give you a little treat. I know. Now you're not going to be grumpy because you get it. Oh, my. Thank you for the pork noises. Oh, my gosh. You're so far away. Good boy. Maybe we'll do one more. So when we're pitching our magazine, it's very obvious when people don't read the magazine. So something to remember is that that magazine editor works with that magazine every day. That's their full-time job. So if you roll in there and you haven't read the magazine, here you go, buddy. If you haven't read the magazine, or you don't have a deep understanding of their tone and style, or you don't show that you get it, how their magazine works, it's very obvious to them. People forget that. They forget that that editor is working in that magazine every single day. Like, it's very obvious to them when something doesn't fit, or that you shopped it around and you didn't actually take any effort to change your headline or make it fit their magazine. So you have to stand out by really understanding the magazine, deeply understanding what they're looking for, the ideas they want, the experts they interview, the type of story structures, like the type of ideas they typically accept, the really unique spins on things. And I bet if you read high-level magazines, like big national magazines, or even I like reading Texas Monthly. So Texas Monthly always has these really unique stories. And it helps me really think about how I approach stories and how I kind of think about things, and how I would pitch them, or how I would apply this strategy to make my ideas really unique. And I think if you find different magazines that resonate with you, like within your state or national or even sometimes local magazines, like we have Austin Monthly. I always love reading that because they have different types of like spins on things that I just wouldn't think of. And it just really helps you kind of like farm, like till your farm, like give the soil some good stuff. And most of the time, I found that we as writers want to write for magazines that we read. If there's a magazine you want to write for that you haven't read very much, you need to read it. You need to understand that. And standing out in their inbox, it very much shows that you like don't get it, that you don't get their magazine if you haven't read it before, or you don't have a deep understanding. So the last thing we want to talk about here is unique perspective. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So giving a unique perspective on our story ideas. Good night. I hope you have a nice sleep. Giving a unique perspective on our story ideas comes from a few different things. For me, it comes from inspirational restaurants or properties. They're doing unique things that no one else in the planet is doing. For me, it comes from unique studies, like random things, not like 4 out of 5 people get heart disease. No, this is like if you chew gum and swallow it, it actually gets stuck in your intestines, because if you have this, gastrointestinal disease, it does like really random shit, really random stuff where you're like, oh, more people need to know about this. It's not just a study. Like, for example, one of the first articles I wrote was a study about the sodium in our diets, right? We all know, it's not a surprise that Americans have high sodium diets. We all know that. But the study I found was like the majority of that sodium isn't, people like get worried about putting salt on their food. It's not from that. It's from packaged and restaurant foods all the time. Like, this study studied all these people, and like 80% of their sodium intake was from prepackaged foods and restaurant foods, and things that, like, if you add salt to your food, that's like a minuscule amount of salt. But most people are worried about that. Most people are worried about seasoning their food or buying low sodium this at the grocery store or whatever. But most of the salt that people eat is not the way they normally think about it. It's not adding salt. It's like the thing you're eating already has tons of salt. So it was like a unique take. Plus, I was writing about pizza. How do you address that as basically a pizza restaurant, right? How do you address that as a place that serves people something that typically has a high level of sodium, or something that people eat pretty often? Pizza is like, I think more people eat pizza than burgers, if I remember right. I don't know if that's right. You can fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure more people eat pizza than burgers. And they don't really think about it, right? Oh, it's just dough and sauce and cheese and maybe some toppings, but it's the way the salt, is the sauce like homemade? Like, do they make it in house, or they buy like a jar of it? And, do they add too much salt to the dough? Do they buy a super salty cheese, or like, do they have a lot of sodium in the ingredients they put on top? Like, maybe you always get like the full meat lovers pizza where you have like bacon, ham, sausage, pepperoni, like all that stuff, right? All those cured meats that can be very heavy, but people don't pay attention to that. So when you're looking at unique takes on your ideas, you got to put all the pieces together. And sometimes I think this takes a little bit of time. It took me a while when I was pitching to understand how to actually build a unique take and make something an article, a slice, not a book. A lot of times I get pitches from students, like my coaching and course students. I get pitches from them. And I'm like, this can be a book, not a book. We are giving someone a slice. Like, just imagine the page that you get on the magazine in the magazine. That's the slice. That's all you get. And you are trying to convey the most useful, impactful, best information in like less than 1,000 words most of the time. Most of my articles, sometimes they're like 3,000 words if I'm doing a big feature, but most of the time it's 800 to 1,000 words, sometimes up to 1,500. So that's all you get. And that's way, way short. So we have to pack it with a punch. That means, when we end up looking for unique ideas, we have to take our own perspective, like question ourselves. I had no idea that sodium was a problem in, I randomly came across that study. I was looking for studies about pizza restaurants, about the restaurant industry, and I came across this random study that had just been done the year before or something. And it was just like, did you know that pizza is one of the places people get the most sodium? And most of their sodium comes from all of these foods that they just eat. They just don't even pay attention to. They're like worried about the salt shaker, and it has nothing to do with that. So, yes, pizza is okay. Thanks for fact checking me on that. That's why we're journalists. We fact check. So, when we're thinking about that, it's unique take. Like, I had no idea. I just came across this study and I was like, oh my gosh, how cool. Like, let's talk about that, pizza and health, or eating out and pizza, because people like, it's a comfort food, right? Especially with the pandemic, right? Like, some of us have been really into the comfort food recently. We got the judgy finger going on. But that thing, sometimes it's just like you just don't pay attention to it, and then it builds up, and then they're like, hey, you go to your next visit and they're like, your sodium's really high, and you're like, but I don't put salt on my food, right? So these ideas, you have to take your own perspective. Question the things that you just kind of like don't pay attention to. Oh yeah, I buy this kind of broth, right? But it turns out that you could get the low sodium version of that broth and it tastes just as good, and like you reduce your sodium a ton. Or the Harris poll. Okay, cool. If you end up, like, for me, a lot of times my ideas come from like questioning things that I normally just kind of like take as like face value, like it is this way, or like I understand it this way, and then I'm like, what about that? Like, what makes, like, there's a lot of times, like I get a lot of pitches, just for an example, about restaurants and properties, because I write about food and travel. So I get a lot of stuff about restaurants that it's just like, it's not new information. Every once in a while I get a restaurant where they're like, hey, this person is using their heritage to bring in random ingredients from around the world to make these crazy dishes. Or I get pitches about restaurants that are like, we're making everything on site. Not only is everything homemade, but we have a garden and we source everything from that garden, and everything you're eating is sourced locally. Like, there is nothing from more than a 50-mile radius. Like, that's really cool and unique. There's lots of places that source different ingredients from all over the world because they're like, well, we need these specific limes, or we need these, we need saffron, or we need this specific type of fish, or whatever. There's not a ton of places that have a super small radius or grow everything on site. We're looking for stuff like that. We're looking for ideas where it's just not common. It's just not stuff. And of course, there are a time and a place for like 5 back to school supplies. There is a time and a place to pitch something where it's just like a general roundup. It's a time and a place for like, let's update this list that we run every year. Let's do that. There's a time and a place. But if you really want to stand out in an editor's inbox, and this is for big publications, people ask me how I got into some of these big publications that I've written for, like Afar and Condé Nast Traveler. And sometimes people ask me how I got into NAR. That's an interesting one. So anyways, you're looking for things that they just can't find anywhere. Like, they're getting so many pitches, so many ideas, so many things. You have to dig around, and you have to come with them not only from your own unique perspective of things that you look upon, but unique things that just aren't happening very many places in the world. Unique things that are a study that's just surprising. It's surprising that like one of my students is writing a pitch and it's about caregivers and the amount of caregivers who deal with the stress of being a caregiver. And she has some really fascinating studies in there that I had no idea. Like, I just had no idea. And you make assumptions, right? As a human, we make assumptions. We're like, oh, yeah, it's probably this way. And then, boom, surprising study. Like, it's totally not what you thought. That's the kind of stuff that we're looking for to really get into these big magazines. Of course, we can always pitch, general stuff if we want. But I think when we're really thinking about magazine pitches, you have to think about the volume of emails that your editor gets in their inbox and how your idea really can stand out. Like, this is something that I think it takes a long time to hone. Like, it took me a long time to get to the point where I was like, oh, they don't want like 5 best coffee shops all the time. They want 5 best coffee shops for like gluten-free brownies that are actually good in your area. Not just gluten-free brownies, but gluten-free brownies that taste good. Or they want something, really specific, or something that is just a slice. I think that's the best way to think about it. How can you give them the most detailed, specific, fun, interesting to read slice of this topic? And I think that kind of helps hone it in. And one last thing I want to say. So if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat. If you have any questions, pop in the chat. A couple last things. So number one, how do you pitch magazines? Like, walk me through that below. How do you pitch? What are your dream publications? Like, walk me through that below. Leave me a comment below. List your dream publications. Put it out into the world, and start pitching them. But let me know what your dream publications are, and then let me know how what kinds of things you really struggle with. How do you kind of go about pitching, and where do you struggle with pitching? So pop that in the comments below, or pop it in the I see the comment box over here. So pop it in the comments. If you feel like this has been helpful so far, give it a thumbs up. If you feel like you want to learn more about a high-earning, sustainable, profitable freelance writing business, make sure to subscribe. Last thing we're going to talk about here is that you have to keep trying. It took me a long time to get in the publications that I wanted to be in. I had to keep pitching and trying and doing all these things, and learning how to craft ideas that really made sense for that magazine. And that's just trial and error. There was someone that I talked to, I think one of my students said they talked to an editor who said, yeah, you have to send them like 10 pitches before they'll ever answer you. And that was just a rule that editor had. You're welcome. I'm glad this has been helpful. I'm going to pop Katie up here. Katie, welcome in. I know you didn't say hello, but hello, Katie, welcome. I'm glad that this has been helpful. If you have questions, you can pop them in the chat too. You have to keep trying. Magazines are limited real estate. There are hundreds, if not thousands of people. That's why I had a friend who it took her 18 months to get into the New York Times, pitching them every month for 18 months, and she finally got a story in the New York Times. I know other writers where the very first story they ever pitched was to the New York Times and it got accepted, and that was their very first clip. But most of the time, it's not that you pitch your first idea and then you end up, are you having a little trouble over there? Okay. It's not that you pitch this idea or you pitch 10 ideas or 20 ideas and then you're like, oh, this isn't going to work out. Like, sometimes you have to pitch 50 to 100 ideas. It depends on how much you want to get in that magazine. Like, some people, I have always loved Travel and Leisure and Condé Nast Traveler. Always. There's a bunch of food publications that I love. Like Afar, I've always loved Afar. Oh, that's okay. Katie, you can't be late. You can't be late. You can only show up and say hello and join in. So you can never be late to a live stream. We're glad you joined us, Katie. So you have to keep pitching and trying, and pick those publications that you really want to get into, because the space is limited and you really got to be unique. You really got to think about it. And it depends on industry too, right? Like, the high-level food and travel publications are going to get a lot more pitches than probably like a real estate publication, like a smaller real estate publication. Like the things that have people, oh, bless you. The things that have people dreaming, the things that have people imagining these cool things they could do, the things that people like add as part of vacations, or like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that that's so luxurious, or those kinds of things are like the things that are hard to get into. Versus ideas where it's kind of a publication that's talking about B2B. And you're giving more information about like how to actually structure your business or make this better. But I think the point is that you have to pick the publications you really want to get into. You have to pick the publications that like spark some good stuff um, in your mind. You have to pick the publications that really speak to you, and then work on honing that in. Hone in your unique perspective, hone in your information, hone in your pitch, and then keep trying. Sometimes it takes a while to get into them. Sometimes you have an editor that works with you. Like I've had editors where I pitch an idea and they're like, can we try this? And I'm like, sure. Like, what about this? And they're like, yes, go with that. Sometimes that happens, and it's really part of the process. So I think just don't give up. Don't give up. If you really want to be in that magazine, keep pitching. Make sure that if you're not getting any hits, make sure you have someone look at your pitches or read their magazine, or you can always ask an editor for feedback. Sometimes they give it. Sometimes you've sent them 20 pitches and you send another pitch and you're like, hey, if there's anything I can do, any feedback you can give me to like make my pitches better, because I would love to be in this magazine. Sometimes they write you back and say, yeah, this sucks because ABC, you need to do DEF. And you're like, oh, and then you go off and do it. So Katie says, the New York Times anecdote you just mentioned is really inspiring to keep in mind. I often have this sense I need to go through this initiation period before I make it in the publications I really want. Yes. We as writers often have this idea that we have to like pay our dues. We don't always have to do that. That's the magic of magazines. That's what I have always found is so cool about magazines. There is no sense sometimes of paying your dues or having to write for your local online blog, then the local magazine, then the state magazine, then the national, there's no concept of that. If you have an idea that is unique, that stands out, that fits the magazine, that truly brings a cool, out of the box perspective, they will publish it. Like regardless, if you can write that pitch that makes sense to them. And that's the thing is like the person who had the New York Times had 0 clips, 0. She didn't go in there and say like, I've written for WAPO and I've written for like all these things. She rolled in there with nothing, but she proved in her pitch that she got it. She understood it. She knew what to do. That writing audition, that idea, that matters a lot more than being like, I've written for 75 publications. And it's like, okay, but your idea sucks, right? So this is really important. We don't have to like pay our dues sometimes with magazines. We have to roll in there with the unique idea that captures attention, that makes sense for that magazine right now, that makes sense to publish it right now. So I like that a lot, Katie. So I'm glad we got to talk about that. We don't always have to do that. We don't always have to it's the same thing with writing novels. Nobody has to write 10 novels before they get a New York bestseller, right? There are people who their very first book they've ever written is a New York Times bestseller. There are authors who submit manuscripts as part of finishing their MFA. That's what happened with Twilight, right? I think Twilight there's been a couple of books that just like blew up where someone submitted the manuscript as part. Oh, maybe it was the Hunger Games. Anyways, there's some recent franchise that was submitted as part of someone's MFA program. They were finishing their MFA, and part of finishing their MFA was to submit, part of their manuscript or however much, a few chapters to some agents to see if they could get a book deal. Boom, they got a book deal. They've never published anything. They haven't even graduated with an MFA, and they had a great idea that stood out, that made sense for the audience they're writing for. Everybody loved it. They published it. We don't have to do all these things. That said, being a writer, just because you get something published once doesn't mean you're going to get it published again. So we have to keep working hard, honing our ideas, thinking of how we can be unique. And honestly, part of that uniqueness is like you as a person. The ideas I come up with, like if I was going to write a story about these guys, my story about these two furples right here would be way different than yours. You don't know them personally, right? Like you don't know their weird little quirks. Oh, here she comes. You don't know like their weird little things that they do or their problems. Your perspective on it is so much different than mine. Can you back up in your hobbit hole, please? Back up. Oh, good job. Good job. Good girl. But if we were going to pitch this idea about my Furples to the same magazine, we would have to understand the tone and style, and our perspective and our unique take would be different, but we would have similar writing styles in there because we're trying to match the magazine. It's just the slant on the idea would be very different than me talking about Bo's geriatric, right? Bo is going to be 15 years old. He's a giant dog. He's like 60, how many? He's 60 pounds now, I think. So Bo's 60 pounds. Charlotte's 50 pounds. And if I was going to write about Bo being 15 years old, that would be a way different story. I would tell you about like how at 15 years old, he can, Katie says she wants to know about their weird things they do that are adorable. Okay. So I'll tell you a few things. We'll stay for a little bit and tell you that. Lori, thank you for coming in. We're glad you were here. I'm hoping this was helpful with tips and encouragement. So thank you for coming in, Lori. All right, so here's some weird things about Bo, just so we have like a fun thing on here. Bo is almost 15 years old. He can jump our couch, okay? Our couch is like one of those tall couches. Like it probably hits me right about here, like right like my rib cage, okay? So it's a tall couch. And he can jump it. He can clear it as a 15-year-old dog. He can get on our counter and get things off the counter, even if they're on the back of the counter. Like, I thought by the time he'd be 15, he would not be doing any of that. And we still have to, like, hide food from him. The other thing that he does is he can run up and down the stairs. Like, I've never had a 15-year-old dog who can do that. Now, the other weird thing is, like, we're pretty sure that he's losing his hearing and his eyesight. So, like, even if he can run up and down the stairs, he's not exactly sure how to locate you sometimes. Like, he can't always hear you. So, like, he'll run up and down the stairs, like, looking for you. But, we have to, like, kind of be in his visual/hearing area. So, and the other weird thing is something that we don't talk about on here, but we're just having, like, some fun on a Friday. So, one of the weird things is that both of them have food aggression. So sometimes what happens with dogs, and this is normal, I think people don't normalize this enough. Dogs have food aggression. It doesn't make them bad dogs. It doesn't make them dangerous. It's part of having a traumatic past, and it's part of them being worried that there is this scarcity of food, that there will not be any more food for them. So what ends up happening is I separate them. So you'll notice when I give them treats, I keep them very far apart. So I keep them far apart because, like, if you drop a treat between them, we might have like a battle to the death. That's just how it is. They love each other. They get along great. Not when it comes to food. So we have to separate their food all the time. So that's an interesting thing that I feel like people don't talk about enough. Is like it's just our old dog. We had a dog named Bruce, and Bruce was a Great Dane Mastiff mix. And he had the same thing. Bruce would eat, like when he ate dinner, he would take 3 kibbles and he would go hide them somewhere. So Bruce would eat his meat. The first thing he did when he ate was he would take 3 kibbles and he would go hide them somewhere. Here you go, buddy. And part of that was because he was scared there wasn't going to be more food, or that Bo was going to eat his food and then he wouldn't have any food. So he would store some kibbles just in case, so at least he had something. And that's just part of his past. So that was a weird thing that Bruce did. Weird things that Charlotte does is like basically everything. She sits weird. She makes strange dinosaur noises. People think she's like possessed. So when we walk her and she sees deer, she makes this horrible sounding noise. Like I would do it, but you guys would be like super frightened. So basically when she sees deer or like she gets very excited, she makes this like noise like you're choking a pterodactyl. Like when we walk Charlotte and people see her like freaking out, she's like, like that's the noise she makes, okay? And people are like, something's wrong. Like, you're choking her. I'm like, no, she has a harness on. There's nothing choking her. She's just excited. These are the weird noises she makes when she's excited. So sometimes you'll hear her make noises on here. Like, she'll make little pork noises, like, she does that all the time. Here you go, bug. But yeah, like the weird thing is like when we walk Charlotte, People just like, she's fine most of the time. Like, she just gets excited and makes these crazy noises where people are like, I'm pretty sure your dog is like needs an exorcism. Like, there's something wrong here. But they do weird things all the time. We have to just, you know, the only thing is, like, we just separate their food. We just don't give them, like, we don't share treats. Like, they keep them in their little dens. Like, they have little crates. Um, what other weird things do you guys do? You guys do so many weird things. Oh, Charlotte sits weird. She like sits like a sad stuffed animal all the time. She's always like, oh gosh, everything's terrible. Like, if you could imagine Eeyore as a dog, that's basically Charlotte. I know. I'm saying her name a lot. She's like, I should get something. Cool. Katie says, yeah, I am glad that he's energetic at 15, but I was really hoping that by now I wouldn't have to like protect my food like on the counter. I thought he wouldn't be able to get up there by now, but here we are. Yeah, and dogs are different, right? Dogs are different than people, right? Dogs, people have food scarcity too, right? We just don't like use our teeth most of the time, right? Like, people do fight over things, right? Like, when there's scarcity of things, people like, how many times have we heard the story of someone being trampled over a 50-inch television on Black Friday? People die over the scarcity of a flat screen TV, right? This is the same thing. It's just like dogs communicate differently than people, and they just trample people, right? They just trample them, which is really horrible. But with dogs, they just, there's that snap thing that happens. They just kind of like, it's like a thing. Like, they're already guarded and then boop, so you have to be really careful about that. And they're both rescues. So we adopted Charlotte here in Austin. She was about 3.5 when we adopted her, and Bo was adopted one day before he was about to be put down. And he was about 1, I think, when that happened. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, when Charlotte sneezes, she makes like an elephant trumpeting noise because she's always farting, because we think we have to take, I think we have to take her in to get her like examined. That she has food allergies, but we're not sure. Yeah. Yeah, true. And I agree, Katie. I think scarcity mindset, it affects us as writers. It affects dogs. It affects people in all different things. Especially with scarcity, like, we could loop it back to the topic. Scarcity with magazine articles. There's only so many pages in the magazine. There's only so many stories that they're going to print, but it doesn't mean you can't keep trying. It doesn't mean that you can't pitch an idea and think like, man, I know this is a fit. And they get back to you and they're like, oh, we just ran something similar, try again. You're like, okay, cool. Let me try this other idea. It doesn't mean that because there's scarcity in pages in the magazine that maybe you don't make it into print. Maybe you make it online. And then you have a clip, and then you eventually can make it to print. So, for example, the print space in like Travel and Leisure and Condé Nast Traveler is like very small. Like, you don't get a lot of space. There's not that many stories that get printed, but there's plenty of spaces online where stuff gets printed. And of course, the pay is different, but the goal isn't always to like get this main thing. Sometimes you have to take steps, and sometimes a step means digital before print. And it's not a matter of like scarcity and like, oh, they only take 10 writers, they'll never take me. It's basically like, I have to have this really good idea to get in there. So we've hopped on for quite a long time today. We'll give them one last Treato. We got new Treatos today. They're peanut butter and banana. And I can tell you right now, King Kong would love them because they just smell just totally like banana. Here you go. They don't smell anything like peanut butter. Here you go, buddy. Good job. All right. Well, thanks for everybody hanging out. I feel like we had a really great little session today. So we had a whole bunch of people coming in. Thanks for showing up. We're here every Friday at noon Central. So if you want to join next time, make sure to hop in. If you have episode recommendations, like things that you want to talk about, questions you have, things that you want help with as a freelance writer, drop them in the comments, and we'll have a live stream and we'll talk about them and make sure that we can, help you out, get everything answered so you can keep moving forward with all your writing. So thanks everybody for hopping in. Hope you have a great Friday, and I will see you next Friday. Bye.